Since 2001, Jagex has been managing players within the always online, ever-growing world of Galanor. This mission has taken them across 3 game engines, 4 if you count old school, 3 payment models, and over 200 million accounts created. It's only natural that massive players of that size would find ways of manipulating and abusing the game to their benefit. Make no mistake, Runescape has had a ton of glitches. With that in mind, this video will not show you how to perform any exploit that may or may not exist in the current version of Runescape or OSRS. These are the 10 most influential glitches of RuneScape's history. This RuneScape 2 glitch was discovered on February 22nd of 2010 and patched the following day without a system rollback. This exploit involved using a chisel and a gemstone, clicking Make All, and then immediately enchanting a stack of bolts in the inventory while gems were still being cut. This would duplicate each unenchanted bolt into 12 enchanted bolts. At this point in time, Dragonstone bolts E were relatively new and expensive, and this was an extremely lucrative money-making method for players with the magic level to enchant Dragonstone bolts. Although the sudden flood of bolts onto the GE definitely made an impact on the RS2 economy, Jagex began manual reviews of accounts trading and enchanting mass quantities of bolts the following day, and most of these bug abusers were permabanned, effectively destroying the inflated currency in their banks. It's also worth noting that even if this glitch had never been discovered or patched, the implementation of the new Make All interface for OSRS in 2017 would likely have corrected it on accident. This glitch has actually re-emerged in several different forms over the years, but always followed the same principle, combining the stats of multiple pieces of worn equipment in one slot to exceed normal balancing standards. The first occurrence of this was found in RuneScape Classic in 2002. At one point in time, regular knives, the kind used in cooking and fletching, could be equipped in the player's right hand as a weak melee weapon. This was short-lived, and with the release of the fletching skill, the wield option was removed. However, the weapon bonuses of the knife remain behind the scenes. In RuneScape Classic, it was not possible to drop items while walking, and some clever players learned that by dropping an equipable weapon while in motion, they could delay the action and bring up the right-click menu once again. Once the character stopped moving and a weapon was dropped, the other items in the player's inventory would shift to the left. If this technique was used on an inventory of knives, the otherwise hidden wield option could still be used on the knife. And since they no longer held weapon code, it was possible to equip more than one and stack their bonuses. I couldn't find any information on the actual stats achievable by this method, but the RuneScape 3 wiki claims that this method was capable of giving a level 3 a max hit of 20. Jagex responded by further patching the knife to make it fully unequipable, destroyed any knives currently equipped, served temporary bans to players who use this technique to train on NPCs, and served permanent bans to players who use this technique to PK in the wilderness. The Runecrafting Glitch occurred on April 14th of 2010, 2 days after the release of the Dungeoneering skill in RuneScape 2. A stealth update to the Dungeons of Daemonheim created an error in the way runecrafting XP was calculated within the dungeon. Naturally, in the main game, runecrafting as a skill is balanced by the distance between banks and runecrafting altars, something not possible within the cramped Dungeoneering dungeons. In fact, within Daemonheim, it's possible to purchase rune essence and immediately craft it on the generic altar only a few tiles away. To make up for this obvious advantage, on the 14th of April, the runecrafting altars in Daemonheim were nerfed to give less experience per rune. However, a mistake was made on that day, which resulted in a few types of runes giving wildly incorrect XP rates. Nature runes granted 2,000 XP each, and fire runes granted an astonishing 14k XP each. As you might expect, this resulted in many players gaining 99 runecrafting in a matter of minutes. It's not known how long this glitch was active in the game, but the spike in runecrafting levels was quickly noticed by Jagex, who were already watching statistics from Dungeoneering closely. In the end, this glitch resulted in every RuneScape server being taken offline for 4 hours while the bug was identified and corrected. A game-wide rollback of 30 minutes was issued, and this news post on the RuneScape website was made public, which has since been removed. On September 2nd of 2008, the first set of distractions and diversions were added to Runescape 2. These were a set of activities with no level requirements that would offer XP rewards on a cooldown timer, much like claiming Tears of Guthix in OSRS. One of these, known colloquially as Penguin Hide and Seek, could be started by talking to Larry at the Ardoon Zoo. Each week, 10 penguins would be hidden across Gelinor, and when one was found, the player could spy on it to receive a penguin point. These could be exchanged with Larry for a coin or XP-based reward of the player's choosing, with the XP rewards and skills like herb lore and construction being significantly more valuable than the raw cash. These penguins are supposed to only be identifiable once each, but on the 28th of January in 2009, the script was bugged, allowing the same penguin to be identified over and over again, amassing an endless amount of penguin points, and by extension, an endless amount of XP in any skill. This resulted in mobs of people gathering at the closest penguin to Ardoon to claim points repeatedly and advance their most expensive skills. On February 3rd, mod John H. posted on the official forums stating that the exploit had been patched and manual action taken against abusers. 154 players had accrued over 250 penguin points in a matter of hours, amassing millions of XP, and were served permanent bans, while hundreds of others who collected slightly more points than intended were served temporary ones, but ultimately were allowed to keep that extra XP. Adding onto the list of easy to perform and very destructive glitches, the public chat glitch occurred on February 25, 2009, and would result in a client crash whenever a player would enter the Greek letter mu into the chat box. This character could be typed through the alt codes 230 or 0181, and would cause a fatal error when the game tried to render it above players' heads. This means that it would not only affect the player that typed it, but also any other players online in that player's vicinity. And while that bug alone could be enough to manipulate the game to a player's benefit, what makes it so much worse is the fact that public chat can be disabled on a client-by-client basis. What this means is that players who knew of the glitch could simply turn off public chat and then repeatedly type the character into the chat box to effectively force disconnect any players around them who didn't also have their public chat set to off. Aside from being a major annoyance, I'm sure you can imagine the destructive force this type of exploit could have in the wilderness or duel arena especially. As an emergency measure, Jagex shut down Bounty Hunter, Clan Wars, and the Duel Arena to buy their team time to identify and correct the vulnerability. They were then forced to serve broad IP address bans to account for the majority of players who created new accounts to perform the glitch in support of their mains. This is a family of glitches that involve walking through walls, bodies of water, or other barriers in order to reach normally inaccessible areas. There have been multiple methods of executing this glitch over the years, but possibly the most widely utilized version went like this. On June 26, 2012, Jagex released the Evolution of Combat beta for Runescape 2. This was a world accessible by accounts that had been a member for at least a year, which had a beta version of the Evolution of Combat incorporated for players to test drive and provide feedback on. However, while this world was being tested by players, the main game was still receiving updates. One of these updates added an extra room to the Gnome Stronghold in the main game, but didn't add it to the beta server. What this meant is by going to this location in the main game and then hopping to the beta world, your character would spawn floating in space, one floor above the RuneScape surface. This made exploring areas like Tutorial Island, Quest and Event random instances, and even the unreleased city of Prifddinas possible. As far as I know, there were not any ways to mechanically take advantage of this exploit, aside from snagging a Legends cape early, but Jagex still executed permanent bans to accounts that they caught exploring out-of-bounds areas. A bit harsh if you ask me. By 2018, RuneScape Classic had been mostly abandoned by Jagex. In fact, for years its access had been restricted to only veteran accounts which had been created before RuneScape 2. In 2016, Jagex decided to stop providing maintenance to RuneScape Classic altogether, opening it permanently in an as-is state so that their internal development teams could focus more on RuneScape 3 and OSRS. While this did increase Classic's player base, it also increased the amount of bots on the servers. Suddenly, the real-world trading market for RuneScape Classic was expanded to an entirely new group of people. Since Jagex was no longer providing any bot detection services for RuneScape Classic, there was nothing to stop cheating. In fact, by this point in time, it's estimated that well over half the accounts logged into Classic at any given time were bots. So, the small group of active RuneScape Classic players who felt their home was being destroyed took action. On the 28th of December 2017, 2 players from the Shadows of Misthalin clan, by sheer chance, discovered a bug while killing demons in the underground pass. If a player dealt damage to a demon so that it was below 50% health, logged out, and then another player finished the kill, the original player would be teleported back to that location to receive the monster's drops. Or rather, the game would attempt to do that. Instead of distributing items based on a player's unique ID, the RS Classic servers recognize a player based on their player ID, which is literally just a number assigned to players in the order that they log into the servers. So when a player with a PID of 7, let's say, dealt a majority of damage to a demon in the underground pass and then logged out, the PID of 7 would be free to be assigned to the next player that logged in. Once that demon was killed, the game would then place the account with the PID of 7 on the demon's spawn point, thinking it was that demon's killer, when in actuality, it might be a different player altogether. One of the most prevalent bot scripts in RS Classic was for buying out runes from shops so that the botters could then resell them for an inflated price. These types of botting accounts were constantly hopping worlds, which meant that their player ID was constantly changing. This made them the perfect target for this exploit, as once they would be teleported to the underground pass, the bot would freeze up and be killed by the demon when it respawned. This method took billions of coins away from the RS Classic botters, and was used as an anti-botting measure by players for nearly 8 months, until the RuneScape Classic servers were finally closed in August of 2018. Transitioning from botting in RuneScape Classic in 2018 to botting in old school RuneScape in 2018, Jagex was beginning to notice a surge in the amount of players pickpocketing Knights of Ardoon for money and thieving XP. Now, it's a bit of a stretch to call these guys botters. Most of them would simply lure the Knights into a corner, hover their mouse over them, and turn on a third-party auto-clicker to automatically pickpocket them over and over. It's really hard for Jagex to detect auto-clicking, especially when the intended game mechanic looks so similar. So they began to theorize methods of requiring legitimate players to move the mouse without negatively hitting the money-making and thieving training of Ardoon Knights too heavily. On July 12th of 2018, the Coinpouch update was initialized. Now when players pickpocketed NPCs, instead of directly receiving coins in the inventory, they would instead obtain a coin pouch, which would need to be opened in order to produce the coins. Only 28 coin pouches can be held at a time in the player's inventory, which meant inevitably a movement of the mouse would be required. This worked well to stop auto-clicking at Ardy Knights, but caused a much larger issue in other parts of the game. As with many untradeable items, coin pouches are programmed to convert themselves into coins when a player dies and the item hits the ground. However, due to an error in their implementation, the coin value calculation for other untradables in the player's inventory was overflowed and turned into 2,147,483,647 coins. I'll say that again. On July 12th of 2018, any untradeable item that was PK'd was converted into a max cash stack. This obviously destroyed the game's economy in a matter of minutes, and required an immediate server shutdown and rollback on Jagex's part. No accounts were banned for abusing the glitch, as it was mostly unintentional, but accounts that purchased bonds with GP during the window this glitch was active did have their membership revoked.
Edgeville. I reckon we'll kill him wherever he is. Yes! What?
Although this famous RS Classic glitch is known as item duplication, it never actually required the player executing it to have a copy of the item to start out with. So a more accurate name might be item creation. This one almost didn't make the list because it does require the use of a third-party cheating application called AutoRune, but the event was so important to RuneScape's history, it gets the number 2 spot anyway. AutoRune was RuneScape's first ever botting program, written by a user named Kadir, but it didn't work the way modern botting programs function. Rather than being a tool that emulates human interaction over a standard client, AutoRune was a proxy server that would run in the background, intercepting code between the RS Classic client and Jagex servers, altering messages sent between the two. Back in 2003, RuneScape's client-to-server communication was unencrypted, which meant that AutoRune could easily read these signals, and that Jagex servers had no choice but to assume the information they were receiving was correct. While using AutoRune was clearly a breach of the RuneScape TOS and definitely a bannable offense even then, it didn't become widespread enough for Jagex to take notice until November 6th of 2003. Kadir had recently added a trading plugin to AutoRune, and a RuneScape Classic user named 6feetunder was trying to use it to manipulate the server into allowing him to trade the untradeable Scythe from that year's Halloween event. Instead, he learned that AutoRune was capable of tricking the server into believing he was trading an item with the player that he didn't actually possess, creating a new item in the process. This exploit quickly spread, and players began mass creation of the most expensive items in the game, most notably the purple party hat. Jagex began noticing a suspicious number of party hats entering the game, but because of the unusual way they were being generated, they were unsure of the origins of the bug. So Jagex offered the reward of lifetime membership to the first person who could explain the glitch to them in detail, and allegedly received over 600 emails in response. On November 7th of 2003, the exploit was patched, and players that had an unusually high number of party hats were manually issued permanent bans. The game received no rollback, and because this glitch was so widespread, the RS Classic economy was forever changed. The purple party hat, which was originally the rarest, became most common, and therefore cheapest. And this remains true in RuneScape 3 nearly 2 decades later. It wouldn't be a proper discussion of RuneScape glitches without including this one. I'm sure most of you know the story, but it's a fun one to tell, so let's get into it. On June 6 of 2006, less than a week after the release of the construction skill in RuneScape 2, a player named Cursed You became the first in history to achieve 99 construction. To celebrate, he threw a house party and invited the general public to tour his POH and witness him getting his final fireworks. Attending the party was another player named Duriel321. Duriel was interacting with the various objects within the POH just like everyone else. Keep in mind, very few people knew anything about high-level furniture. At some point, Cursed You kicked everyone from his house, unintentionally granting Duriel and a few other players the ability to attack players in safe areas. Duriel then went to Falador and slaughtered hundreds of players for their items, amassing billions of GP before he was permabanned around an hour later. Now most people think this glitch was an exploit of the combat ring, with someone claiming to be Duriel321 even confirming this.
And this is where everybody, I've read a lot of stories, this is where a lot of people get it wrong. It was actually the combat ring. Whoever was inside the combat ring, when he ejected people, I got a connection lost, and then I reconnected outside of the house. Yeah, I still had the attack option. I clicked on someone, because I was like, whoa, what the heck? This is weird. Clicked on someone and I was able to attack them.
But the combat ring can be built as early as 51 construction, so why did it take almost a week for this glitch to be discovered? Well, since the Falador Massacre, the name Duriel321 has become very well known, and there have been multiple hacking attempts made on the account. Remember, two-factor authentication wasn't an option in 06. Multiple people currently have the ability to log into Duriel's account, and so now there's a lot of controversy surrounding who the original owner actually is.
So you knew what he sounds like, and I guess that's an important thing for this story is, as you said, that the person, Jacob, that I interviewed in my last video, didn't sound anything like the Duriel that you used to speak to.
No, well, see, at the time, Duriel was around 16, and he had a much deeper voice, and that dude you interviewed doesn't sound like that. So
This makes me question the validity of the combat ring claim altogether. In fact, I believe the Falador Massacre was actually an unintentional exploit of the scrying pool. If you don't already know, this is a piece of furniture to be built in the center of a portal room that allows players to interact with it to see the exterior of a portal built in that room. Now, because of the way the Runescape client works, this preview can't be a pop-up interface like a shop or a bank would have. The client isn't capable of layering two copies of the 3D game world on top of one another, so it physically takes the camera to that location being examined and places this purple shimmer effect over the window. In other words, while looking through a scrying pool, you are technically teleported to that area temporarily, or at least as far as the server's concerned. Cursed You had his scrying pool built in his house dungeon, and PvP enabled in that dungeon. So when Duriel321 used his scrying pool and was, I guess we'll call it, soft teleported to that location, he did so carrying the ability to attack other players with him. Normally this wouldn't matter because you can't interact with anything while looking through the scrying pool. But if this was the point at which Cursed You kicked everyone from his house, there would be no POH for Duriel to be teleported back to, and no way for his PvP flag to be removed. This meant that Duriel was placed outside of the POH portal, with the server believing he was still within a player-owned dungeon. This type of glitch is known as a forced teleport, and there have been all sorts of ways to manipulate the game in this way over RuneScape's lifetime, but this event is no doubt the most famous. We know Cursed You had PvP enabled in his house dungeon, and the individual claiming to be Duriel even confirms that. So why, after global PvP was enabled, would you continue to fight within the house combat ring? It just doesn't make sense to me. Besides, the combat ring always has PvP enabled. Do you really think Jagex forgot to test what would happen if someone was kicked from the house while inside one? From a developer standpoint, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. The scrying pool, on the other hand, isn't unlocked until level 80 construction, and is generally built on the first floor of a player's house, outside the dungeon. I think it's much more likely that Jagex simply never tested the combination of being kicked from a POH, while looking into a scrying pool, while in a house dungeon, while PvP was enabled. But what do you think? Is the real Duriel telling the story the way it actually happened? Or do you think he's a copycat hoping to get some fame for repeating the most widely accepted rumor back at the community? And what do you think about the scrying pool theory? I'll leave a link in the video description to the person claiming to be Duriel so you can make your own conclusion. Obviously, there are a ton more influential glitches in RuneScape's history that couldn't make the cut in this video. In fact, this has probably been the most difficult list for me to build so far. So with that in mind, feel free to throw a favorite of yours that wasn't included down in the comments and start a discussion. Hope this video has been a pleasure. See you at the GE.